Stone Butch Blues, Chapter 9. Jim Boney didn't show up for work on Monday. I was glad. I wouldn't have to admit this to anyone, but I was still scared of him. So when he called in sick Monday morning, I walked around the plant feeling a little smug. Jack pulled me off the line and led me to a die cutter which punched school flashcards into the shapes of decks. Normally, one of the guys used a powerful air hose to blow away the trim before it jammed the machine. "The air hose is being fixed," Jack shouted over the roar of the machinery. "You assist Jan when she needs help loading her skids. Every once in a while, you brush the shit off the press like this." He ran his hand across the face of the die cutter in the split seconds between the punches. "Don't let it jam," he warned me before he walked away. Jan looked at the machine and back at me. "Be careful," she cautioned. I watched the die cutter punch the decks, trying to learn its rhythms like a song. My hand darted out and quickly brushed some of the trim away. I got most of it. My hands were trembling. When you work around machines, you grow to respect their mesmerizing power. I tried to stay in sync with the punch press. Just once my hand was slow. Just once was all it took. It happened so fast. One moment my fingers were all connected to me. The next moment, I could feel my ring finger laying against my palm. My blood spurted in an arc across the machine. The decks of cards stacked on the skids and the wall in front of me. I tried not to look at my left hand, but I did. My stomach heaved before my mind could even understand what my eyes saw. I couldn't have been heard over the thunder of the machines, but it didn't matter. I couldn't make a sound. Everything took place in slow motion. Jan waved her arms and shouted. People came near but froze in horror. It occurred to me I should go to the hospital. I knew I couldn't drive my motorcycle as I walked to the door. I wondered if I had enough bus fare. Walter and Duffy ran after me. The next thing I remember was being in a car. Walter had his arm around me. Duffy was driving, and he kept turning around to look for a sign from Walter. My whole hand was bound up in a red-soaked cloth. I felt so sorry for my finger that hot tears of grief ran down my face. I was thinking maybe I should bury it. I wondered who I should invite. Walter lifted my injured hand up high with one of his large, gentle hands and held me tightly against him with the other. I shook violently. "It's gonna be okay, honey," he crooned. "I see a lot of these things happen. It's gonna be all right." The next thing I knew, I was lying on an operating table. I panicked. What if they took my clothes off? There was no one around. A fly buzzed around me and landed on my hand. My body lurched. The fly circled and landed again. This time, as my injured hand jerked, my finger seemed to move in a different direction. I passed out. It was Duffy's face I saw as I drifted back to consciousness. He was smiling, but he looked upset, too. "Duffy," I whispered. "Where's my finger?" He winced. "It's okay, Jess. They saved your finger." I didn't think it was true. I'd seen lots of movies where they'd lie to injured people like that. I lifted my head slightly to look at my hand. It was covered with layers of gauze, and there was some kind of metal device running from my forearm into the gauze and then emerging at the tip where my finger would be. Duffy nodded. "Your finger's okay, Jess. The bone wasn't completely severed." He turned away as he said it. I thought maybe he was going to throw up. I was still dressed in my bloody work clothes. "Get me out of here, Duffy." He stopped at the pharmacy to fill my prescription and drove me home. When I awoke, he was gone. There was a note on the nightstand explaining when I should take the pills. He also left his phone number and said I should call when I woke up. I was relieved to find I was still in my work clothes. I called him later that night as he raced over. "Jack set you up, Jess." Duffy paced around my kitchen. "Just before he put you on the machine, one of the guys saw Kevin removing the safety device. Jack could claim he took it off because the hose was on the blink, but ordering someone to put their hand on it was an out-and-out contract violation." I had trouble following what Duffy was saying. It wasn't just that my mind was hazy with painkillers. I didn't want to understand. "But get this, Jess." Duffy bent over the kitchen table and pounded it. After we took you to the hospital, Drac reinstalled the safety device and swears it was on the whole time. The bastard set you up, Jess." I felt woozy with fear. It reminded me of when my parents had me committed, or the cops opened my cell door. So many people in the world had so much power to control and hurt me. I shrugged as though it wasn't important to me. "Look, Duffy, it's over. Besides, the contract's up in 2 months. We got other things to worry about." Duffy looked at me like I was crazy, but when he spoke his voice was calm. "No, Jess, we're going to worry a lot about this. We're going to prove what Jack did to you, and we're going to tell management. Either he's out or we all walk out." I marveled at the idea. The straight people would stand up for me, or for any he-she. "You know," Duffy added, "I don't think I really realize how hard it is for you. I know what jerks the guys at work can be sometimes." He leaned up against the sink and folded his arms. "But when I went to the hospital with you, I saw how they treated you, how they talked about you." He rubbed his face. When he looked back at me, I saw tears in his eyes. I felt so helpless, you know. I kept yelling at them that you were a human being, that you mattered, and it was like they weren't even listening to me. I couldn't do anything to help you, and I couldn't make them take care of you the way I wanted, you know. I nodded. I did know, and now I knew that Duffy did too. Jan drove me to Abba's on Friday night. Everyone cheered when I walked in. They hung a sign on the wall in the back room that read, "Get well, Jess." Frankie and Grant and Johnny told me Duffy organized a union investigation of the accident. I was watching Jan. She looked sad. "Where's Edna?" I whispered to Grant. Grant drew an index finger across her throat. I waited till I saw Jan sitting alone in the back. I brought over 2 beers. "Can I sit with you?" She gestured toward an empty chair. "You're my friend, Jan," I told her, "and I love you." She looked surprised when I said that. "If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay with me, but I can't pretend I don't know you're hurtin'." Jan leaned forward and rested her elbow on the table. "I lost her. I love her and I lost her. What else is there to say?" I shrugged. "I know you both loved each other a lot." Jan took a swig of her beer. "Sometimes love just isn't enough," she said. I hoped she was wrong. She sighed. "The worst part is, it's my fault. I knew she was going to leave me, and I just couldn't change fast enough to stop her. Who knows? Maybe I'm just too old to change at all." I didn't know what she was talking about, but I kept my mouth shut. Jan slumped. "If I tell you why she broke up with me, you promise you'll never tell another soul?" I thought about it before I answered her. "You can trust me," I said. "You took long enough to answer," she said warily. First I had to make sure I meant it. Jan's voice grew hoarse. "I just couldn't let her touch me. We never talk about it. I don't even know how to talk about it. At first it was okay with her. She understood. But later she told me she prided herself on always having been able to seduce her stone lovers. That scared the shit out of me, you know. I was thinking how nice it would be to have a femme lover who cared enough to try." "Anyway," Jan said, "I couldn't, and she finally left me. After all these years, can you believe that?" She laughed ironically. "The only woman I ever loved so goddamn much it makes my teeth ache, and she left me." Jan gripped my arm. I'd do anything to get her back. She had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "I'd get down on my goddamn knees in front of the whole bar. I'd do anything. I just can't change the way I am. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't, you know?" I did. I leaned forward and put my arm around her. She leaned her head against my shoulder. If Jan hadn't been drunk, she might have been embarrassed. Deep down, my insides seethed. I knew I was stoned too. I was a home alarm system that didn't seem to have an on-off switch. Once installed, the sirens went off and the gates shut, even if the intruder was loving. Would I finally find a woman who loved me and lose her because of that? If that was true, life seemed too hard to bear. I obsessed about one thing Jan had told me. Edna prided herself on being able to seduce her stone butch lovers. I wondered how she did it. I wondered how it would feel to be touched and not be afraid. I thought about Edna a lot. I hung out at Abba's almost every evening while I recuperated on compensation. Jan stopped going to the bar, afraid to run into Edna. Edna came to the bar on Saturdays. I looked forward to that night all week long. When she walked through the door that Saturday night, she was all I could see. Everyone else was in black and white. Only Edna was in full living color. She headed right toward me. I got off the bar stool as she approached. Edna reached down for my injured hand. She lightly supported the metal contraption and looked up at my face. I shrugged. "It's better the doctors say I'll have feeling in it," I reassured her. "How long do you have to wear this?" she asked. "I don't know. They'll tell me in a month." I saw concern in her eyes. I felt honored. We both sat down, and I gestured to Meg for 2 drinks. I reached for my wallet. Edna rested her hand on my arm. "I'm working," she said. "Let me pay." Edna took a sip of her drink. "You're really brave," she told me. I felt ashamed. It wasn't true. "I'm not, really," I told her honestly. "I'm scared all the time, Edna." Her face softened. What a brave thing to say to me. I blushed. She put her hands over mine. Her nails shined with fresh red polish. "You know what I think?" she asked. I leaned forward to her. "I think everybody's scared. But if you don't let your fears stop you, that's bravery." I decided she was the wisest person I'd ever met. Edna ran her fingers through her own hair. It was such an intimate gesture. She saw the look on my face. She dropped her eyes and smiled. Someone put a quarter in the jukebox. "You're my soul and my heart's inspiration," the Righteous Brothers sang. I wondered if I had the courage to ask her to dance. "Edna," I mumbled, "want to dance?" At that moment the bar door opened and everyone fell silent. Standing in the doorway was a mountain of a woman. She wore a black leather jacket, unzipped, her chest was flat, and it was clear she wasn't wearing a binder. Her jeans were low-slung, unbelted. She carried her riding gloves and her helmet in one hand. Rocco, her legend, preceded her. I glanced over at Edna. She was lost in a memory I couldn't see. I watched their face as they saw each other for the first time in years. I looked back and forth as though this was a tennis match, and I didn't want to miss a stroke. I could feel how much they loved each other. "Hello, Rocky," Edna said quietly. It sounded like a line from a movie. "Hello, Edna," Rocco answered in a deep timbre. Their faces were close to each other and to mine. I could see the beard stubble on Rocco's chin and cheeks. Jan once told me that Rocco had been beaten up so many times nobody could count. The last time the cops beat her, she came close to dying. Jan heard that Rocco had taken hormones and had breast surgery. Now she worked as a man on a construction gang. Jan said Rocco wasn't the only he-she who'd done that. It was a fantastic tale. I'd only half believed it, but it haunted me. No matter how painful it was to be a he-she, I wondered what kind of courage was required to leave the sex you'd always known, or to live so alone. I wanted to know Rocco. I wanted to ask her a million questions. I wanted to see the world through her eyes, but most of all, I wanted her to be different than me. I was afraid to see myself in Rocco. I watched Edna's face. She held herself with such strength and dignity, it made the pain she tried to conceal all the more obvious. I couldn't tell if she was reaching to touch Rocco's cheeks or if it was just reading Edna's mind. I trembled at my nearness to 2 such powerful women. Rocco touched Edna's elbow. Edna rose and led Rocco to a table in the back room. I sat alone, shaken. I felt left out, jealous. I hungered for more attention of both women as I stole a glance back at Edna. I longed for her to look at me that way. I wished I was so powerful that a glimpse of me could shake the leaves from her branches, and I wanted Rocco to be my friend, to reveal all the secrets of the universe we resolved in. I wanted her as a home to come to when I wasn't strong. I strained to read their body language as they talked. Rocco stood up. Edna held onto Rocco's leather lapels. Their lips touched briefly. Then Rocco turned to go. I wished Rocco could have seen the look on Edna's face after her back was turned. It might have meant a lot to her. Rocco was headed toward me to go out the door. I searched my brain to think of something to say to make her stop and talk. Maybe the pained look on my face made her pause in front of me. She asked me a question with her eyebrows. I couldn't find the words to say what I wanted. I'm not sure I even knew. For just a moment, doubt flickered across Rocco's face. I saw her guard begin to go up. I couldn't think of what to do, so I extended my hand to her. She looked at it, and she glared at the other hand, all bandaged and looking like a part of a robot. As she shook my hand, she nodded, I'll never know why, and then left the bar. The sound level rose again after she'd gone. I felt empty and hollow with loss. If I ached, I knew Edna must be bleeding. I waited a decent amount of time before I went back to her. Can I buy you a drink? I asked her. She looked startled. What? She hesitated. Yes, thank you. We drank in silence. I felt connected to her grief. I watched the couple dancing in the smoky darkness. Out of the blue, Edna looked over at me and whispered. I hurt, she said it so calmly and quietly. I was afraid I'd misunderstood her. But I saw the pain in her eyes, so I moved my chair near hers. Edna curled up against me, softly exploring my body with hers. Holding her was such a simple joy. She sighed once, and then her body shook with sobs. At first I felt embarrassed, worried what people might think, but then I gave myself to Edna, concerned only with her comfort. She trusted me enough to bring her sorrow to my arms. I kissed her hair. The scent made me lightheaded. She looked up at me. I longed to lift her chin with my hands and kiss her mouth, deeply and slowly. She saw the look in my eyes. There was no point in hiding it. I'll be right back, she said. Edna was in the bathroom for a long time. When she returned, I offered her a cigarette and lit it for her. Edna shook her head slowly. Just when I thought I couldn't hurt any more, guess who walks in the door? I exhaled smoke and watched her face. What did she want? I couldn't believe I'd asked her such a personal question. Edna blinked in surprise at my directness. She heard Jan and I broke up. She waited a month or so and came to ask me if there was a chance she would get back together. I lightly tapped my Zippo lighter against the whiskey glass. Butch Morse code. Is there a chance, I mean? Edna sighed. People have seasons, you know. Cycles. I just left an 8-year marriage. Rocco's been alone a long time. It hurt me to think of Rocco being lonely. I don't think I've ever seen a woman like Rocco before, I told her. I could see Edna wasn't quite sure what I meant, and I realized she'd fight to the death to defend Rocco. I wish she were my friend, I said quickly, to make her understand. She smiled warmly and reached out to touch my arm. Rocco would love you, Edna said. I brightened. You really think so? Edna nodded and looked and shook her head. You remind me of her in many ways. You're a lot like she was when she was younger. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but part of me was afraid to hear her answer. One time, I told her, it was the first night I found one of our bars. That's the night I met Al. Edna nodded. You were a friend of Al's, she said. A misty look clouded her eyes. You knew Al? I asked her. I meant knew in the biblical sense. She understood the question. This is a small world, she answered. This circle of people stays pretty much the same. She touched my arm. Whatever you do now, make sure you can live with it for the rest of your life. I knew I'd better give that a lot of thought. Anyway, she said, I interrupted you. I leaned forward. When I first laid eyes on Al, it was like love at first sight, you know? Edna's face softened. I mean, there's different kinds of love, I said. I can't explain how it feels to me, but it's love. That's how I felt tonight when I saw Rocco. Edna touched my face with her fingertips. The more I get to know you, she said, the more I like you. She leaned forward and kissed me lightly on the lips. I blushed from head to toe. Edna smiled. I've got to go home and sleep, Edna told me. Do you want a ride? I shook my head. I think I'm going to stay for a while, thanks. After Edna left, I replayed the whole night in my mind, over and over again. Scabs, we all screamed as the cops tried to help them cross our lines and take our jobs away. Hundreds of us strained at the barricades, and the cops held the scabs back. "Faggots," some of the guys yelled back at the strike breakers. All the butches pulled back from the police barricade. The words seared like burning metal. "Duffy," I pulled his arm. "What's this faggot shit?" Duffy appeared torn in 10 directions. "All right," he said. "Listen up, you guys. Stop with the faggot stuff. They're scabs." The men looked confused. A light bulb lit up over Walter's head. "Aw, shit." He extended his hand to me. "We didn't mean you guys." I shook his hand. "Listen," I said. "Call them whatever you want, but don't call them faggots." Walter nodded. "Agreed." "You cocksuckers, you motherfuckers," they shouted instead. I pushed forward at the barricade. "You fucking scabs," I yelled. "You all have sex with other men." The guys looked baffled. "What's she talking about?" Sammy wanted to know. "You have intercourse with your own mother," I screamed. "That's disgusting," Walter said. Duffy intervened. "Okay, they're scab and strike breakers. Let's call them what they are, all right?" Duffy glared at me, but there was a smile underneath it. Grant pulled me aside and motioned towards Duffy. "You know that guy's a communist." I was stunned. "He is not," I told her. "Oh yeah?" she asked me. "How do you know?" Jan looked worried. "Is that true?" "It's bullshit," I told them both. When they went back to yelling at the scabs and the cops, I stood next to Duffy. "What's up?" he asked. I shrugged. "Are you a communist?" I was hoping he'd laugh, or at least look startled, but instead he had a sad look in his eyes. "Do we need to talk about it now?" he asked. I told them it was bullshit, I said. "It is bullshit, isn't it?" "Can we talk about it later?" he asked me again. I nodded, but I wished we could have worked it out right there. I just wanted to hear him say it wasn't true. The cops suddenly put on their riot helmets and took out their clubs. We all tensed and gathered at the front of the barricade. They were ready to bring the scabs in past us. We roared so loudly that people from the nearby projects came to watch. We rattled the barricade to remind the cops and scabs how frail the wood was, and held up our signs, loosely stapled to 2x4s. As the scabs moved closer, one of them pulled out a blackjack and hit Frankie's fingers which were resting on the barricade. Jan got so mad when she saw that happen. She cracked the scab over the head with her picket sign. The cops grabbed Jan and pulled her right over the barricade. They threw her up against the police van and roughed her up. 3 strikers tried to jump the barricades to help Jan, but the cops nabbed them and handcuffed them. All 4 were thrown in the back of the police van. "Duffy," I yelled over the confusion. "Duffy, we got to go get her out of there. Help her." Duffy worked his way through the crowd. "Jess, we got 4 union people in the van." "Duffy, you don't understand. Think about it. It's different for her to get busted. Please listen." I didn't have time to explain. Duffy took my arm and looked me in the face for the answer. I let him see the fear and the shame in a way I've never voluntarily let a man see before. Duffy nodded. He understood. Duffy pushed his way up to the barricade, lifted his work boot, and kicked it over. "Come on," he signaled the strikers. The cops were caught off guard as we surged past them. There were skirmishes, but most of us made it to the police wagon and surrounded it. People from the projects formed an outer circle around us. "Let them go." We rocked the van. "Let them go. Let them go." An ashen-faced cop wearing gold bars whispered to an officer nearby. We closed in around them. Quickly, they opened the van. 4 sets of handcuffs were unlocked just as fast as they'd been busted. The 4 were free. We all turned towards the group of scabs who were near the plant door. Without a cordon of police for protection, they scurried like rats. Several of them ran inside the factory and attempted to hold the door shut. Some of the strikers pulled at the door, struggling to get at them. Others chased scabs down the streets. The police pulled back across the street. We set up a picket line right in front of the plant doors. "Contract! Contract!" we all cheered ourselves. "We won," I shouted to Duffy. "We won." He shook his head. "We won this battle. Tomorrow will be even rougher." What a spoil sport, I thought. I saw Jan trembling. I signaled to Duffy that I was going to get her out of there. Jan and I walked a block away to her parked car. She leaned against the car door and heaved her guts up. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost couldn't light her cigarette. I pulled out my Zippo. "I was scared back there," she said. I nodded. "Me too." No, she grabbed me by the shoulder. I mean, I didn't think I could take it. Not alone. Not without Edna to go home to. I flushed at the thought of going home to Edna. I pushed the thought back down. I know, Jan, I whispered. When you got busted, I suddenly remembered things I didn't want to think about, like they were happening to me all over again. She looked up at me and smiled gratefully. You understand, she said. I nodded and dropped my eyes. Jan crowed. I can't believe you guys got me out. It was unbelievable. I thought I was a goner, and you guys got me out. Unfucking believable. We laughed until tears streamed down our faces. I've got to go back now, I told her. Why don't you go home and get some rest? Jan nodded. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock a.m.? I smiled and turned to go. Jan called to me. You're a real friend, you know that? If only she knew how I felt about Edna, she'd understand what a traitor I really was. I was so sound asleep that night when Duffy called. You were right, he shouted. We won it at the table tonight, and we got management to agree that Jack is out. I tried to climb from the depths of sleep. What? What did you say? Jess, we won, he laughed. The ratification meeting is tomorrow night. I want you to organize all the butches to come to the union meeting to vote. You got that? Sure, I mumbled and hung up. The next morning, I called up all the butches from the plant so we could go to the meeting Tuesday night as a group. When I called Grant, she had big news. The steel plant had to hire 50 women, she told me. They're accepting applications Wednesday morning. I don't know about you, but I'll be camping out there in the line Tuesday night. By late that night, the line will stretch from Lackawanna to Tonawanda. It was a slight exaggeration, but her point was well taken. I called Jan. I don't know, she said. What do you think we should do? I was kinda hoping you'd tell me what we should do, I told her. I called Duffy on Tuesday afternoon. I told him all the butches wanted the chance to go into the steel plant. There was a long silence on the line. It's a mistake, he said. You don't understand, I shouted. You don't know what it means to us to get into a big plant like that. He tried to argue with me. If the vote passes, at least punch in Wednesday morning or else you'll be automatically fired. He didn't seem to realize I was already gone. You don't understand what it would mean to work in the steel mill, do you? He shouted back at me. What the hell is this about? Looking tough? Yeah, I yelled, in a way, but not like you're saying it. All we got is the clothes we wear, the bikes we ride, and where we work, you know? You can ride a Honda and work in a bindery, or you can ride a Harley and work in the steel plant. The other butches are going to leave sooner or later. I don't want to get stuck in that sweatshop with that rinky-dink union. I knew I'd hurt him, but I couldn't find a way to retreat. If you don't understand that, I can't explain it to you, I told him. Well, I think it's stupid. He sounded like a kid. That's when I knew I'd really hurt him. The company was ordered to hire 50 women, but they don't have to keep them. If 5 of you last the 90 days to go into the union, I'll eat Jimmy Boney's baseball mitt. I was riled. It's my baseball mitt, I reminded him, and hung up the phone. Tuesday night was bitter cold. We huddled around the flames leaping out of the metal barrels. It was a long, long night. My stomach tightened every time I thought about the contract ratification meeting. You think we made a mistake? Jan asked me. I didn't answer. Fuck Duffy, I thought to myself. He doesn't understand us. The first 50 of us filled out applications and were told to return the next night at midnight. There was a snow squall during the day while we slept, but Jan and I were determined to get to work anyway. We wandered through the plant as though we had just landed on this rusty corrugated planet. Sounds muffled and loud startled us. The blast furnace lit up the sky orange and red. We gave the foreman our work assignment slips. He looked at us up and down. Come with me, he said, and led us outside. The wind whipped the top layer of powdery snow into tiny tornadoes. The foreman took one of 2 shovels, and he dug until we heard a clank of metal against metal. You hear that? Railroad tracks. He handed us each a shovel. Clean 'em off. He looked at my left hand. I had wrapped a scarf around my injured hand. The cold made the metal brace burn against my skin. "You gonna be able to work?" He nodded toward my hand. "Sure," I said. "How far do the tracks go?" He answered over his shoulder. "You can shovel all night long and never get to the end." Jan and I stared at the snowdrifts. Jan threw her shovel down. It thumped softly in the snow. I braced myself, but she spoke quietly. "I'm too old for this horse shit," she said. "They're gonna make it hell for us until we quit." I knew she was right. "Come on," she told me. "I'll drive you home." I sat up until dawn, watching the snow fall. I knew I'd been fired the day before when I didn't punch in for the first shift after the strike officially ended. When light glowed on the horizon, I walked to the bindery, so I'd be there when Duffy arrived. I came out from behind the gate as soon as his car pulled in. I couldn't read the look on his face when he saw me. "What do you want?" he asked. He asked it gently, but the words were cold. "You were right." I nearly choked on the words. He shook his head. "I'm not glad I was right." I shrugged. "It doesn't matter, really. I just came to tell you that I'm sorry. I made a mistake." He put his arm around me. "I made a mistake too. I've thought a lot about it. You remember when you were bidding on the same job as Leroy?" I nodded. "Well," Duff continued, "you were willing to step aside to make sure Leroy got the job. And you told me the butches weren't welcome at the union meeting. I asked you to wait till after the strike to deal with it. It wasn't that I thought your grievance wasn't as important. I only had so much energy to deal with everything. But maybe that's how it seemed to you. I'm sorry, Jess. If I could do it again, I'd bring Leroy and all the butches to the next meeting and say to the guys, 'Here we all are, we're the union.' I think I made a mistake too." Tommy and Duffy were the only two men who'd ever apologized to me. "I gotta go," I told him. "You're gonna be late." "Wait," he held up a gloved hand. "I have something for you." He unlocked his car door and handed me a wrapped present. "After I found out we won the strike, I got this for you." Duffy looked embarrassed as he handed it to me. He took off his gloves and shook my hand. "Goodbye, Jess." "Thanks." "Thanks for what?" He smiled. "Thanks for teaching me so much." He turned and walked away. I walked home in the snow, trying not to think about anything. When I got home, I realized I was still carrying the package. It was wrapped up in an AFL-CIO newsletter, and it had a gold bow that looked left over from Christmas. It was a book, an autobiography of a woman labor organizer named Mother Jones. Inside the front cover, Duffy had written, "To Jess with great expectations." I went to the window and looked out over the mound of snow, wishing I could do everything in my life once as practice and then go back and do it again. I sat at the bar and smoked nervously, waiting for Edna to arrive. Justine raised one eyebrow. "She's not here yet?" "Who?" I asked innocently. Justine smiled and raised her glass in a toast. "To love," she said, "or is it lust?" My defense crumbled. I just know that I wait all week to see her, and when I do... "Uh-oh," Justine laughed. "Does she feel the same way?" I shrugged. "I think she likes me." Justine leaned forward. "So what's the problem, darling?" "I don't know. She's single. I'm single. There's no law against it, right?" Justine didn't answer. "I don't know, Justine. It just doesn't feel right. I mean, Jan's my friend. She told me stuff, confided in me. It would never be right again with me and Jan. But then when I see Edna, I want her so much it hurts." Justine didn't say a word. "Say something," I pleaded. Justine shrugged. "This one you've got to figure out on your own. Thanks a lot." Edna walked in the door. We couldn't pretend to be casual. She held my eyes as she walked over to me. She smoothed my lapels and kissed me lightly on the lips. My heart was thumping. Edna led me by the hand into the back room. I put my drink down on the table and started to sit down, but Edna pulled me toward the dance floor. This was a moment I'd dreamed of. The pleasure of the dance was so exquisite, I almost couldn't stand it. I only opened my eyes once while the music was playing. I saw Jan watching us. Although she was only silhouetted, I recognized her jealous rage in an instant. She was gone. Edna pulled back and looked at me. "What's wrong?" she asked. My eyes brimmed with tears. She put her fingertips on my cheeks and drew me closer. "Did I do something wrong?" I couldn't explain that I was afraid I'd just lost Jan too. Edna led me back to the table. "Edna," I began. She shook her head. "I don't like the sound of that." "You don't have to explain," she said as she gathered her purse and coat in her arms. "Wait," I told her. "You don't understand." She dropped her coat warily. "I want you so much, it's driving me crazy. It just doesn't feel right." Edna didn't say a word. This was my job to try and explain. "I can't stop thinking about you." She leaned forward and rested her hand on my uninjured arm. But she still didn't speak. "Remember something you told me about people having seasons? You just broke up with Jan, and you're hurting." "I love Jan too. She's my friend." Edna dropped her head and then raised it. Her eyes were filled with sadness. "I thought you were going to tell me I was too old for you." "I don't think you're old at all, Edna. I think I'm a little too young for you. I'm not really talking about age so much as being grown up. Sometimes I imagine walking into the bar with you and being an instant elder because you're on my arm." Edna still didn't speak. She sure wasn't making this any easier for me. And sometimes when I get so confused about what to do, I think he could make sense of the world to me. Edna smiled gently. "But I can't be an instant elder. I can't jump over all the things I've got to learn. I can't get it all from you. I guess I'm saying that the first time I take you into my arms as a lover, and I will someday, I want to be more grown up than I am now." I sucked in my breath. "And second of all, I love Jan. She's my friend. You told me that what I do now, I'll have to live for the rest of my life." "I did say that," Edna sighed wistfully. She sat back on her chair, just for a moment, when I wished she'd moved closer. "I'm not ready to settle down with any butch," she told me. "But if I were, I'd be honored to walk into the bar on your arm. If anyone had told me I could hurt as much as I do and still be so attracted to you, I would have thought they were crazy." I blushed. These were words I'd waited to hear. She smiled. "I am very flattered that a young butch like you would pay me such attention. You've made me feel beautiful at a time when I didn't think I was. But I don't think I really realized what you were made of until I just heard what you said." "I love butches." She squeezed my arm. Her words were like a fire I warmed my hands in front of. "I love Rocco and Jan for being willing to take on the whole world rather than make a lie out of their lives, and somehow they still managed to be honorable women. They were loyal to me and to their friends." I nodded and dropped my eyes. "I respect them for that," she told me. "It's part of why I love them so much, and I see that in you." I was afraid if we kept talking I would forget my decision and bury myself in her arms. I wanted to ask her to teach me how to let myself be touched, but I couldn't violate Jan's confidence. Edna spoke first. "I've got to go home now." I sighed in relief. I stood and held her coat for her. She slipped her arms into the sleeves and turned to me. She kissed me lightly on the lips. I took her waist in my hands. Her mouth opened for me, and I discovered all the pleasure I'd hoped to find in its warmth. She pulled back. So did I. She lifted my injured hand and kissed my fingertips, and then she was gone. I stood in the same spot for a long time, unable to move. Peaches appeared at my side. "Come on, child," she said, leading me to the bar. "Set 'em up, Meg, and keep 'em comin'." Justine lifted her glass in the air to salute me. "I wouldn't have said you were wrong, but in my book, you did the right thing." I slumped on the bar. "Jan's mad at me anyways," I told them. She saw us dancing together. Justine stroked my hair. "She's still your friend." "I'm afraid I've lost them both," I sighed. Justine shook her head. "Jan will be back." And Edna was crying and smiling when she walked out of here. "You must have done something right." I shook my head. "I don't know. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything right." Peaches laughed. You wait and see. The right girl is coming down the road, headed in your direction. If that was true, I sure wish she'd hurry.